Today's video is going to be a time lapse of this painting, as well as discussing my most recent controversial post on social media that I've made in a while. So there's a video going viral on TikTok of a wedding painter who has gone viral for kind of the wrong reasons. She shared her painting that she created and disclosed the price that the client paid for it. I think it was just under $1,000. And people are really frustrated because they don't think it's worth that much money. And I will say, to clarify, people who seem the most outraged and they're the most adamant that this is bad have really convinced themselves that the client is being duped, and we have no reason to believe that. That's completely conjecture. People are saying, well, if I got this, I would be mad. But let's remember, we don't know. The bride may love this style. The bride may be related or friends or close with the artist, because sometimes what matters about art is that someone made it like that. And that's not just that's every rung of the art world. A scribble by Picasso, even if it was a measly scribble, would still be worth so much money because of who made it. So we can't forget that doesn't fall off a cliff after you get past the artists who have a lot of pedigree and name recognition, right? My scribbles that my children give me on construction paper are precious to me because they're for my children, and there might be that element too. There's a lot that we don't know about this conversation, but the reason I'm making this video is I'm wanting to specifically address compassionately sort of both parts of this, because I'm an artist. I feel really, sensitive and kind of emotional for this poor artist getting, not, people are saying very unkind things to her on social media. I mentor artists and teach a lot of artists, and I've had them mention to me, I'm scared to share my work because of things like this. And unfortunately, this isn't the only time this has happened. Again, don't think I'd make a video if it was, but rather that this is an occurrence that happens kind of a lot with anyone in the creative field. The internet thinks something's not worth it, and they just become, some people, not all, are pretty ruthless. And I will say right off the top, it's okay to not like certain art, totally fine. Everyone is completely entitled to their opinion. Totally. And I will also say, I don't see anything wrong with someone saying, hey, I would not pay that much for this. Again, totally fine. I will say, it's not the loudest thing ever, but the fact that if you charge, if you say that my fee for a wedding painting is $1,000 and then you don't get hired for a year, that's, as a person who works in this field, that's louder than you think. People have a real need to sort of tell people that their price isn't worth it. But I will tell you, if someone lists their price and it doesn't sell at that price, that's a pretty, that's a hard thing to ignore. So I promise you guys, you don't have to tell every artist they're worth, they're not worth what they're charging. Because if they're not, then they'll know. I promise. Anyways, and so I'm wanting to defend this artist because in the short video I made on social media, my takeaway, in a 30-second video, was that the real meat of any good piece of art is connection over perfection. It's a good rhyme. But it really helped me because, earlier in my career, I remember just trying to get better and better at my craft. Specifically at painting representationally, because as someone who came from sort of a running background, that is what I sort of just translated what I was doing with running to painting, just to continue taking workshops and painting more realistic, and that was my goal. But I learned pretty quickly that that's not how the art world works, and that if you don't take into account how subjective work is and how much art is about connecting with your audience, which may be very narrow, it may be pretty broad. It's usually people who they're already sort of enjoying the kind of things, that your themes, your subject matter, etc., right? You cannot just try to make your art palatable to everyone. And I will say, you would think, okay, well, just paint really realistic, get so good at painting representation that everyone loves it. But the thing is, lots of the high end of the art world, the upper tier, despise representational realism, perfect photorealism. I've heard people who I respect in the art world call it lazy, uninspired. They don't like it. They never look at it. They reject everyone who paints that way. So, it's to really drive it home, there's no winning. You have to focus on connecting with people who are going to enjoy what you're saying more than anything else. It's not to say you don't push yourself, and if you want to paint representationally, it doesn't mean give it up and just, of course, I teach an art school, like an online art school. Like if I didn't believe in that, I wouldn't, put effort into that. But I think you have to prioritize like your authentic way that you show up and connecting with people who are going to be receptive to whatever it is you're trying to say and do with your artwork. And now, since, this is a 10-minute video, I'm also going to be a little sympathetic to, I think, the emotional state of people who are kind of upset with this artist for charging this much money for a painting that they personally don't perceive as good, which we've already gone over. Doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, assuming the client was happy. Because of my background as someone who grew up below the poverty line, who sort of has working class values, who, I was able to go to college on a running scholarship because I worked really hard and put in a lot of effort and sort of, I believed in the tenets of sort of the meritocracy, that you could move up in life and you do stuff in life if you worked hard, if you put in the effort, if you showed up, if you grinded, if you were willing to work harder than everyone else. And I remember that was a lot of my pursuit of my painting early on, as I sort of just transferred what I knew about becoming a good distance runner, which was show up, put in extra work, tack on a few extra miles, stretch, eat well, all those things to take care of yourself. And I sort of approached my art practice that way. And because I didn't have, I had a great painting professor, I took a lot of great art history classes, but I didn't really have exposure to sort of the top part of the contemporary art world until a few years into my professional career, because I started out, like a lot of people, doing pet portraits for $50, doing house paintings for a few $100s, doing the trajectory that most of us have to do if we want to break into the art world, unless you are otherwise sort of fortunate enough to be able to do an MFA program or meet a mega collector. Most of the time you sort of your career is going to be a little more of a grind in the way that mine has, and I'm grateful for it. It's not me complaining at all. I'm incredibly grateful for what I have. But, it has been years of me doing slow and steady and learning how to get better at my craft. And for me, that has been moving towards more representation. Not to say that I paint super realistic, but that's been sort of the general trajectory. But of course, there was a moment, and I remember it so clearly. There was an artist and an art educator who I looked up to. They taught for a long time at RISD, and they sort of shared what was happening in the contemporary art world in a way that was really accessible, thus me finding it. And one time someone asked about photorealism, which again, I wasn't all the way there yet, but that was kind of where I was aiming loosely. And they stopped, and kind of in a way that was sort of shocking to their usual demeanor, they said, "I hate photorealism. It's lazy, it's bad. If I'm jurying anything with it, I just throw it out." And it shocked me because in the context of my world, selling pet portraits and paintings of landmarks in my city to sort of people in a tax bracket not too dissimilar from me, like we all sort of valued what looked like skilled painting, that someone put time and effort into getting good at something. And by good at, I meant more representational, more realistic looking. And to all of a sudden realize that what I had been sort of aiming for was something that was going to potentially be a liability in my career was heartbreaking. But I think here's the irony in it, because like the same advice that I would give myself in that moment, and the advice that I eventually actually end up really sticking to, is focus on connection over perfection. And what that made me do is sort of look inwards and what do I like and where do I want to go and what do I want to say with my artwork and who am I trying to talk to. The same advice that I gave myself in that moment is the same advice that I would give to this wedding painter. The focus on connecting. What is authentic to you? Where do you want to go with your art? Who do you want to speak to? And it's funny because it just goes to prove just how incredibly subjective the art world is and why you really can't make art to sort of please other people. And I know that seems obvious. I probably didn't need to make a whole 10-minute video to prove that point, but it's really to sort of, I don't know, just be compassionate to anyone who's listening to this and who feels maybe insecure about their work, or maybe doesn't understand why representational realism isn't like a gold standard within the art world. The truth is, it's incredibly subjective, and the quicker you can sort of focus on connecting with yourself and with your audience and not worrying what people in general have to say about your artwork, I think the happier your art practice will be, and honestly, the better art you'll make. Thanks guys for listening. Subscribe if you want to hear more, and I'll talk to you next week.